February 12th, 1943 North Atlantic, 320 miles east of St. John's, Newfoundland. The sea is iron grey, its waves knifing against the hull of the SS Empire Chivalry. Inside the galley, steam rises from boiling potatoes as cook Thomas "Tommy" Lawson wipes condensation from the porthole and peers into the storm. Beyond the glass, nothing, just endless cold and the thought of German U-boats lurking beneath. At that hour, Convoy HX 223 was fighting to stay alive. 63 merchant ships stretched across miles of ocean, each carrying food, oil, and ammunition vital to Britain's survival. Somewhere below, a Wolfpack of 5 Type 7 submarines U-187, U-456, U-614, U-262, and U-608 fanned out in a deadly search pattern. Their hydrophones, the German equivalent of underwater ears, could detect the rhythmic hum of a ship's propellers long before a periscope ever broke the surface. At 0217, the Royal Navy escort HMS Beverley reported sonar contact. Moments later, a torpedo slammed into the Empire trader midships. A column of flame pierced the night. The convoy scattered. Lawson heard the blast even from deep in the mess. A dull, concussive thud that rattled plates on their hooks. The ship lurched. The smell of diesel filled the corridor. He rushed topside. The night was alive with chaos, flares bursting, signal lamps flashing orders, distant cries swallowed by wind. In the freezing dark, Lawson gripped the rail, staring at the boiling water where the trader had been. 50 men gone in less than a minute. It wasn't his first attack. In 2 years at sea, Lawson had cooked through 5 convoys, watched men burn or freeze, and buried too many friends in the Atlantic. But this time, something in him hardened. They can hear us, he muttered to no one. That's how they find us. They hear us coming. He didn't know it yet. But that obsession, the sound of his own ship, would lead to one of the strangest, most life-saving innovations of the war. Back in the galley, the steam whistle over the soup kettles gave a faint hiss. The metal walls vibrated whenever the engines turned over. To Lawson, it sounded almost like the low hum of a tuning fork. He pressed his ear to the bulkhead. The vibration ran straight through the metal into the sea, a mechanical heartbeat screaming their position to anything listening below. He remembered something odd from the Empire Avocet, his previous ship, when the bilge was flooded during a storm. The engine room went strangely quiet. The ship felt smoother, almost muffled. At the time, it was a nuisance extra pumping duty. But now, in that moment of fear and fury, it sparked a thought that would seem insane to any naval engineer. "What if," he whispered, "we could wrap the sound in water?" The convoy limped on through the storm. By dawn, 2 ships were lost, 1 damaged. Lawson brewed coffee for the exhausted deckhands. But his mind wasn't in the pot. It was in the engine room, in the echo of machinery and the shape of sound beneath the waves. That night, while peeling potatoes, he began sketching on the back of a ration, manifest a crude outline of a ship's hull surrounded by pockets tanks. He called them filled with seawater. If sound travelled differently through water than through steel, maybe it could be scattered, absorbed, or bent away from listening U-boats. He wasn't a scientist. He barely finished school before signing up for the merchant service. But Lawson knew sound. Every cook did. You could tell how close a boiler was to boiling just by the pitch of the rattle. You could sense a storm coming by the way. The galley pipes vibrated. To him, ships sang, and he was starting to understand their tune. By the time the convoy reached Liverpool, his insane idea was nearly complete, at least on paper. But who would listen to a cook? The Navy had their scientists, their sonar officers, their acoustic laboratories. Still, Lawson tore the sketches from his notepad. folded them into an envelope, and scrawled across it in pencil, "To the Admiralty urgent away to make ships silent." He left it at the port office with a shrug. Maybe someone would laugh. Maybe they'd throw it away. Either way. Het tried. 3 weeks later. A black car from the Ministry of War Transport pulled up outside his boarding house. A man in uniform stepped out, holding the same crumpled envelope. "Thomas Lawson," he asked. Lawson nodded, confused. "Get your coat," the officer said. "The Admiralty wants to hear about your soup pans." Lawson frowned. Soup pans. The officer smirked. That's what they called it. "But you may have just saved the Atlantic." The car door slammed, and the rain swallowed their voices. What the Navy engineers discovered in Lawson's crazy sketches would challenge every assumption they had about underwater warfare and spark one of the most secret tests of the Battle of the Atlantic. March 4th. 1943 Whitehall. London. The rain had turned the Admiralty courtyard into a mirror. Grey uniforms and black umbrellas glided across its surface like shadows. Inside room 214. The air smelled of pipe smoke and damp wool. Charts of the Atlantic were pinned wall to wall, with red pins marking lost convoys, more than 200 ships gone in 6 months. Every pin meant men drowned. Supplies lost. The blockade tightening. At the centre of the room, 3 men waited. Commander James Butterworth of the anti-submarine division tapped a pencil against his folder. Next to him, a young engineer from the Royal Naval Scientific Service, Lieutenant Colin Arbery, leafed through a stack of papers. Across from them sat Thomas Lawson, the merchant ship cook, his heavy coat dripping onto the parquet floor. "Mr. Lawson." Butterworth began, voice clipped. "Your letter claims you found a way to make ships invisible." Lawson shifted. Embarrassed, not invisible. "Sir, just quieter. The U-boats don't see us first. They hear us." The engineer gave a polite cough. "You're referring to acoustic detection hydrophones, yes. The sound carries through the hull. If we could dampen it even a little, they might not pick us up." Butterworth raised an eyebrow. "And your method involves water in barrels?" Lawson nodded. "Water in pockets along the engine hull. The way a kettle stops rattling when it's half full, sound gets trapped." Softened. A faint chuckle rippled around the table. Harbury hid a smile behind his file. "You understand, Mr. Lawson. Water conducts sound faster than air. It's hardly insulation." Lawson leaned forward, eyes steady. "Not when it's moving. If the water's sloshing, mixing air with it, it scatters the vibration. Stops the rhythm. U-boats listen for rhythm." That line hung in the air. Even Harbury hesitated. Rhythm. The mechanical heartbeat of a ship. Something no one in the labs had quite described that way. Butterworth finally closed the file. "Very well. You'll come to Derry. We'll test this kettle theory." 10 days later, at the Royal Navy Trials Base in Londonderry, a captured trawler named HMS Precursor waited at dock, stripped of weapons and fitted with Lawson's improvised system. Thin tanks bolted along the inner hull, filled halfway with seawater and compressed air. When the engine started, the water swayed inside the tanks like a living thing, splashing rhythmically against the plates. In the observation shack above the pier, Lieutenant Harbury adjusted his hydrophone receiver. On the second channel, another operator monitored a control vessel half a mile away. They started recording. The Precursor's engines revved, screws churning foam. Normally, the sound would roar through the headphones like a heartbeat. Now almost nothing, just a low, irregular murmur. Harbury frowned. "Tap the dial. Check channel 2. He said. The second operator switched frequencies, same result. The trawler had nearly vanished beneath the background hiss of the sea. Butterworth leaned toward the cook. "How in God's name?" Lawson smiled awkwardly. "Guess the soup pans worked." "Sire." They repeated the test for 2 hours. varying speed, depth, distance. The results held a 40 to 60% reduction in detectable noise across frequencies used by German hydrophones. It wasn't perfect, but it was revolutionary. The Admiralty's report would later call it Project Hollow, though the men in the field nicknamed it the wet muffler. By April, 3 merchant escorts were retrofitted with Lawson tanks. They sailed in Convoy ONS-5, unknowingly part of an experiment that would soon collide with the largest U-boat assault of the war. If Lawson's idea failed, 40 ships and thousands of men would be left blind in the water. If it worked, it might change the sound of the Atlantic forever. As Convoy ONS-5 left Halifax, 40 ships steamed into a storm and straight into a waiting Wolfpack. Deep beneath the waves, German U-boat captains strained to hear engines that had suddenly gone silent. April 22, 1943 Halifax Harbour, Nova Scotia. Fog curled through the docks like smoke from a dying fire. The convoy was forming 42 merchant ships heavy with wheat, oil, and ammunition, guarded by a ring of corvettes and destroyers under Commander Peter Gretton of the Royal Navy. Their destination, Liverpool, their enemy Karl Dönitz's Wolfpacks, prowling across the mid-Atlantic gap where Allied air cover still could not reach. Among the merchantmen was the SS Empire Lawrence, newly equipped with Lawson's experimental water-baffled tanks. He had stayed aboard to oversee them. Still officially listed as cook. Merchant Navy. His galley smelled of frying onions and diesel. Above, the escort signal lamps blinked in the grey. Convoy ONS-5. Make ready to sail, crackled the loudspeaker. Engines steered, lines dropped. The ships slipped from harbour one by one, funnels bleeding smoke into the mist. Lawson climbed to the rail as Halifax disappeared astern. He whispered to himself, "Let's see if the sea can keep a secret." By the 5th day, the Atlantic showed its teeth. Wind force 9. Snow flurries like shrapnel. Ships lost visual contact. Only radio code kept formation alive. Below the waves, the German commander aboard U-650 was listening. His hydrophone operator, Obergefreiter Müller, pressed the headset tight. Brow furrowed. Nothing but static. "Try again," barked the captain. Müller adjusted the gain. "Herr Kapitän, I can't hear them. There should be propeller beats at this range." The captain frowned. "They're here. They must be. Keep sweeping." Across the storm, 30 U-boats from Groups Specht and Mise were closing in, expecting easy prey. Yet night after night, their bearings were off by miles. Their hydrophones caught ghost echoes short, broken pulses, easily lost in the sea's roar. Lawson's water-pocketed hulls were scattering the sound exactly as he had imagined. May 4, 1943 Mid-Atlantic Gap. Black Pit. The storm finally broke. Sunlight glinted on endless grey water. Gretton's destroyers detected radar contacts U-boats on the surface. Charging batteries. The order came sharp. All escorts attack. Depth charges rolled from stern racks. Water erupted in pillars of white. HMS Duncan scored a hit. Oil slicks surfaced. Below, U-125 crash-dived, hydrophone useless in the distorted turbulence. "Verdammt!" cursed the commander. "They sound like fishing trawlers." Then vanish on the Empire Lawrence. Lawson steadied himself in the galley as shockwaves rattled the pans. He had no gun, no station, only his notebook. He noted the times of each explosion, the intervals between sonar pings, patterns, breaks, silence. Every silence meant one less U-boat. That night, the convoy's luck turned darker. SS North Britain was torpedoed astern. Then Wentworth caught fire. Men abandoned ship into freezing water. Gretton's escorts counterattacked ferociously. When the sea calmed 3 hours later, 6 U-boats were destroyed. 23 Allied sailors lost. but ONS-5 still held course more intact than any convoy that spring. At dawn, Lawson climbed to the deck. The horizon was littered with wreckage and gulls. A young seaman beside him muttered, "We should all be dead." Lawson looked at the faint ripples sliding along the hull where his tanks were hidden. Maybe the sea finally stopped listening. He said softly. That same afternoon, HMS Tay transmitted a coded report to London. Experimental hull dampening shows significant acoustic reduction. Enemy locating ability severely degraded. Recommend expansion. In Whitehall, Admiral Max Horton underlined the message twice. The cook's insane idea had worked, but the cost of victory was still heavy. Hundreds of men drowned that week across the Atlantic. For every convoy saved, another was lost. And Lawson knew silence might not be enough. The Germans would adapt. They always did. He closed his notebook, stared at the grey sea, and wondered what came next. While the Admiralty rushed to replicate his system across the fleet, one captured U-boat officer revealed something terrifying. The Germans were developing an acoustic torpedo, one that listened for the very silence Lawson had created. June 1943, the captured U-boat pen at Loch Ryan, Scotland. A grey dawn leaked through the mist as British divers surfaced beside the wreck of U-2000, 503, recently dragged ashore. Its hull was cracked like an eggshell, but inside, engineers discovered something new. A sleek, cigar-shaped device with 4 fins and a peculiar nose of perforated metal. The tag read Gesebenest 5 Zaunkönig, an acoustic torpedo. Commander Butterworth stood beside the recovered weapon. Rain dripping from his trench coat. "It listens," said Lieutenant Harbury quietly. "Literally listens. The propeller noise draws it in." Butterworth's jaw tightened. "And if our ships are silent," Harbury shook his head, "then it hunts for patterns, any change in frequency, even the gaps between pulses." They both looked toward Lawson, who had been summoned from Liverpool that morning. The cook squinted at the torpedo. "So now, the sea's not just hearing us," he murmured. "It's answering back." At the Admiralty lab in Portsmouth, tests confirmed the horror. The T5 torpedo carried a tiny hydrophone array wired to a rudimentary logic circuit crude. But lethal. It could steer itself toward the loudest sound within 400 meters. Allied escort ships, whose depth-charge propellers screamed through the water, were perfect targets. Within weeks, the Germans had deployed hundreds across the Bay of Biscay. By August, losses spiked again. 3 corvettes and 2 destroyers sunk in 1 week alone. Every sonar ping felt like a death sentence. Men began calling the new threat singing death. In Derry, Lawson watched the casualty lists grow. His invention had saved convoys from detection. Now, it might be helping their killers. The very silence he'd engineered made escorts hesitant to maneuver, afraid of revealing any tone or cavitation. He wrote a letter to Butterworth. "If they hear rhythm, we break rhythm. If they hear silence, we make noise they can't understand." 3 days later, Butterworth sent a telegram come Portsmouth. Immediately, the next experiment began in secret. Lawson, Harbury, and a handful of engineers gathered in a narrow dockside warehouse. The plan: generate decoy noise, an artificial ghost ship under the water to lure the torpedoes away. They mounted an old aircraft fuel pump inside a steel drum, fed by compressed air, and a spinning vane. When powered, it emitted a pulsing throb that imitated a propeller, but varied randomly in pitch. They called it Foxer. At dawn on September 9th, 1943, the HMS Whitehall towed the prototype through calm seas. 2 acoustic torpedoes were released from a captured launch, aimed directly at the destroyer's stern. Both curved mid-course, chasing the metallic wail of the decoy instead. One detonated harmlessly 50 yards away. The other sank into silence. Lawson stared over the gunwale. Awed. "So we make music?" he said, and let them dance to it. Within weeks, convoys were equipped with foxer tows, hollow pipes, and rotating vanes dragging behind the stern, screaming through the water like banshees to submariners below. It was a carnival of false echoes. The Zonkonig lost its ears. By winter, U-boat kill rates plummeted. Dönitz himself called it die akustische Katastrophe, the acoustic catastrophe. For the first time since 1939, the Atlantic sounded safer than it had in years. One evening, as the last convoy of the year approached Liverpool, Lawson stood on deck beside Butterworth. Snow drifted over the water like ash. The Foxer trailed behind them, shrieking faintly a lullaby of defiance. "You've done it again," Butterworth said. Lawson shrugged. "No. Sire, the sea just taught us a new song." He smiled, faintly, and returned below deck to his galley. The kettle whistled. The ship hummed quietly, alive but unafraid. In the logbooks of the Admiralty, his contribution was filed under Acoustic Countermeasures, Lawson Modification. No medals, no speeches, but among merchant sailors, word spread of the cook who silenced the ocean, and that silence born from one man's stubborn listening helped win the longest battle of the war.